Okay, so my Doomfist guide is so old that I have to rework it at this point, so here we go. Doomfist is a surgical dive throw that specializes in extreme burst mobility and burst damage. The most important concept to understand with Doomfist is soft versus hard engaging. Soft engaging involves quick in and outs, like slamming in and punching out, and hard engaging involves going in with the intention to get a kill or force out a lot of resources. The 4 triggers being HP, cooldowns, ultimates, and positioning will dictate whether you hard engage or not. You also have 3 main playstyles on Doomfist: disrupting, diving, and dueling/flank control. Doom's hand cannon, the shotgun sniper, makes Doomfist fire 11 pellets that deal 5 damage each at around 3 shots per second. Honestly, there isn't much more to this than what I already mentioned in my old Doomfist guide, which is trigger discipline. Back on my old team, Warwick Angels, who were at a semi-professional level in tier 3 and finished 25th in stage 1 of OWCS, we had a running joke about our Doom player being unable to hit Lucios when trying to clean up teamfights. Just don't rush your shots or even your cooldowns against targets that are hard to hit. Take the extra half a second to readjust your crosshairs to actually hit your shots up close. The last thing to mention is to shoot before any of your abilities. Literally, just shoot. It's 3 damage and you'll gain another shot by the time your ability ends. Doom's first ability, the Randy Orton special, makes Doom slam the ground, dealing 50 damage to those hit by the slam with a cooldown of 6 seconds. I thought I'd also mention your passive, which gives you 40 shields for every target that you hit with one of your abilities. It gives you 75 in Meteor Strike instead. The number one thing for Dooms to understand with their slam is to know when and how to soft engage and hard engage. This is the most important section in this video, so you might need to replay this part. The best way to explain the difference between soft and hard engages is through risk and rewards. Soft engaging is low risk, low rewards. You're going in to get some ult charge, maybe get a bit of space, maybe force out a cooldown or 2, that's it. The normal soft engage on Doomfist looks like slamming in, then punching out. Now a hard engage is typically medium risk, high rewards. In some cases, it might be high risk, high rewards. This time, you're usually going in with the intent to get a kill or to force out a disproportionate amount of resources like space, cooldowns, ultimates, or HP. The normal hard engage on Doomfist usually involves either Empowered Punch, Meteor Strike, or both. So when do you do either soft or hard engages? How do you know when to hard engage? This is the thing that is likely stopping you from climbing. Thankfully, it's quite simple. There's usually 4 factors here. The first and simplest one is cooldowns. I just mentioned it, but if you have Empowered Punch, that greatly increases your lethality and your rewards. The second factor here is ultimates. Again, I just mentioned it, but if you have Meteor Strike, that greatly increases your lethality or rewards. The third factor is HP. If the enemy team are low on HP, or maybe you're up against a Reinhardt who has no armor, or maybe you have a ton of passive overhealth to use. This can again increase your rewards or decrease your risk based on how much HP you have. If you're low, you shouldn't be hard engaging. And the last factor, or trigger, is positioning. If the enemy team are in open space or are rotating in open space, or if the enemy ground tank has dropped from high ground, leaving their backline vulnerable, or if your DPS are in a prime position to actually engage, this can then increase your rewards and encourage you to actually hard engage. So that's a lot of talking, but it's such a vital concept to get down. To solidify things, here's a visual example of me coaching a Doom player on why this hard engage was a bad idea. Just play the corner here, 4 series to drop, and then Seismic Slam, punch the high ground, power block, and then punch out or punch in, depending on how your HP is. Don't engage this. Don't engage this. Like, what do you see here? You haven't got empowered, and then Orisa golds, and you still go in anyway. So, like, there's no trigger. There's no trigger here. In more scenarios, right, if your Venture was, like, engaging from here, your Tracer was engaging from here, then that would make more sense. Because that's a natural trigger. You've got a positional advantage that allows you to hard engage like this. Now, if you wanted to contest a Hanzo, you could slam up here, and then draw his attention, drop down. Fine, that's a soft engage. If you want a higher level example or a proper example of a Doomfist soft engaging, here's one from Get Quaked On. Also, notice his slam placement. He's not slamming out an open space, he's slamming to a corner.
And there's Orisa right here. Okay. I don't want to stay on the bot to fight Orisa. She's not going to die if I do that because she has Kiriko and Ana heals. This Orisa is not going to die, so I need to go into their backline for a few reasons. One, I want to distract their supports so they don't heal the Orisa, which I'm going to strip away Orisa's resources, which is what keeps her alive. And then I'm also going to be pressuring Widowmaker because Widowmaker in top 500 lobbies is a pain. That's what I try to do here. I go straight into their backline. And you could see the spot that I land in, I'm landing where I can play around cover. I'm not landing out here in the open. I'm landing right here, and I'm just going to play around cover. I don't need to fully commit with my abilities. I'm just kind of just distracting them, letting them know I exist in their backline and I'm shooting at them.
Just to build on that a bit more, I made a video on aggression, and basically the idea was that you can play aggressively, but in safe ways. That angle that Get Quicked On was playing is an aggressive angle, but he's actually very safe because of the cover and how he's playing it. If he just stood in front of the Orisa, I would argue he's at more danger even though he's playing a more passive angle. Another thing to mention with your slam is that if you're going to engage with your punch and slam outs, you might want to consider slamming to a different angle instead of slamming from main. For example, on Basan Downtown, you could drop from the high ground, punch in, then slam out in the direction of the cinema. This gives you another angle to engage from, instead of going back main to points. Also, I need to mention this, but you can obviously cancel your slam with your block to get insane verticality, and you can cancel your slam with punch for similar reasoning. You can also fully charge your punch, then slam afterwards to gain insane horizontal mobility. You'd primarily use either of these options to get out of spawn quicker. It's great on maps like Icon World Second Point, for example. Before I continue, just a quick coaching plug. People like Spylo have approved of my coaching, so that's how you know it's good. Check the top link in the description to join my Discord for more details. Doom's second ability, One Punch Man, makes Doom charge his Rocket Punch to deal up to 115 damage in total with a cooldown of 4 seconds. It can also be empowered, but I'll get onto that later. Because Doom is a very holistic hero where all his cooldowns are interlinked to each other, it's hard to give any advice specific to his punch. As a result, this section is going to be mainly tech related. The first is obvious but fundamental, jumping at the end of your punch to conserve momentum. Everyone already knows this, but for good reason. The second is turn punching, when you turn the camera and jump to change the direction of where you want to end up at. The main use for this is going to be escaping around corners in a pinch. You're never going to use this for engagements because it cancels out your punch. The third is bounce punching, which I'm struggling to see how it might be useful in an actual game, but it looks cool, so there you go. And the same applies to diagonal punches, where you essentially punch off slanted surfaces. This might be useful if you already have empowered punch and you want a quirky hard engage. Doom's third ability, Ramattra block but worse, makes Doomfist block incoming damage from the front by 80%. If you block or mitigate 100 damage, the cooldown of your punch is reset and your next punch will be empowered. Empowered punches deal 50% more damage, meaning you deal up to 173 damage on a fully charged empowered punch. You also travel 50% faster and 50% further, don't forget that, and your blast back area of your AoE punch is greatly increased, meaning you can punch multiple targets at once. You do actually need to hit a target though, you can't just miss the punch. The first thing to mention with block is how damage mitigation works on it. Get Quicked On explained this pretty well, but in short, if you take 100 damage, only 80% of that is going to count towards your empowered punch. The remaining 20% you take as damage. The second thing is that, as Get Quicked On showed, you can build block faster by looking downwards a bit to expose your head hitbox. Now in terms of why you use block, the intention behind it is to get empowered punch 95% of the time. Empowered punch is your trigger to hard engage, because if you hit a squishy into a wall, it's a free kill more often than not. Now in terms of how you use block, there's two main ways. The first is just charging at a distance, which you want to do against heavily ranged comps, and especially against projectile based heroes. Hanzo Storm Arrows, Ryan Fire Strikes, Symmetra Orbs, Zen Orbs, Pharah and Junkrat spam, Sojourn spam, there's so much stuff, that's what I'm getting at. Just make sure you're playing a corner while you charge that punch, because you don't want to get forced out or get CC'd. The second is charging block while you're already engaging or while you're already in. Now there's one issue with that obviously, which is that you're vulnerable to stuns or CC. Arna Sleep, Cast Nade, even Brig Stun and Rally. As a result, here's me explaining how to adapt your playstyle to that comp and it does link into some of the soft engage stuff I talked about earlier, as well as some macro stuff later on. Not to mention when you're playing against like Brig, Ass, Ana, that kind of comp, that comp loses or will not have as much map control as your comp, right? So these guys will play very, very stacked a lot of the time, which allows you to just slam them from different angles with cover and get essentially farm like free ult charge, and then you can actually hard engage, right? So maybe you build up an empowered punch from range, hard the dive the BCA backline, stuff like that. Before I move on, it's worth noting that just because you have empowered punch doesn't mean you need to use it as soon as possible. Get Quick Don mentioned this in his video, and on this example with Zarya on Circle Royale, the reason why he isn't punching is because there aren't enough triggers. More specifically, the enemy team still have a lot of HP, cooldowns, and more importantly, Get Quick Don doesn't have a positional advantage because the enemy team's backline haven't walked out yet. That is why he keeps baiting the punch, and again, it links back into everything I've said about soft and hard engages. Doom's ultimate, the escape plan, makes Doomfist leap into the air, striking targets on the ground. The inner sphere of your Meteor Strike does 300 damage, and the outer sphere scales from 100 to 50. You also get 75 healing while in the air, your cooldowns charge twice as fast, and you also deal a 50% movement slow to targets you hit, and you get a free empowered punch when you land back down. So I know there's probably some tech on Meteor Strike, but the main thing here is just using it as a get out of jail free card. You will have the choice to either escape to live to fight another day, or to keep going in with the extra HP, cooldowns, and empowered punch, and as you might expect, that choice will come down to triggers and whether it's a soft or hard engage. If the enemy team are low while you're in Meteor Strike for example, you probably should keep going in. Now onto the playstyle section with Doomfist. Here you have 3 main playstyles, and the very important thing to understand is that you should switch playstyles as the fight progresses, as you'll see. The first is Disrupting. This one is a bit comp specific, but it essentially involves slamming in and out of teams constantly in order to soften them up. Chipsa mentioned this in Spylo's guide, where you would commonly do this against the Lucio based comps with low range, and you'd also do this against comps with a lot of CC, like Ana or Cass, and play to bait their cooldowns, but I think there's some extra macro we're missing, which I'll cover in the second playstyle, Dueling. Now, dueling doesn't necessarily mean taking heroes one-on-one. Obviously, you can and should mark that squishy hero who's taking an angle by themselves, but this more so refers to controlling space and controlling angles thanks to your insane mobility. My old team, Warwick Angels, who are very high ranked, commonly ran Doomfist with either a Genji or a Tracer, and also with a Kiriko more times than not. The mobility that the Doom Tracer or the Doom Genji had, plus with the support of the Kiriko, meant that we could take any angle that we wanted. The last playstyle in this video is the dive playstyle. This is basically hard engaging on the enemy backline when you have enough triggers. For example, maybe you're playing up against a poke brawl bunker comp, so you disrupt them first with soft engages to soften them up, then you dive them when you have a clear trigger. Here's an example I made applying those 3 playstyles to one of your worst comps in the game. As you can see here, there's a Sombra, a Sigma, an Ana, a Cassidy, and a Brig. There's 3 forms of CC here, so we'll see how you can apply each of those playstyles in this situation. So the first one is Disrupting. Now obviously this includes slamming in, then punching out, but when you're against so much CC, Sigma Rock, Cass Flashbang, Sombra Hack, and Ana Sleep Dart, that playstyle can often be really hard to do. So an example of applying that here will be trying to slam to off angles or to positions that aren't directly in front of this stunned backline, this Ana Brig Cass backline, and then leveraging your mobility around them. Maybe you slam here or slam here, then punch straight out, and because these guys have such low mobility, they can't chase you if you decide to go on this angle. Now, I know what you're saying, right? Maybe their Sombra decides to play here, right? And then maybe the Sombra hacks you while you're going in. So what do you do about that, right? Well, the key thing here is actually having some backup or some other DPS source to disrupt and push out that Sombra, right? So for example here, there might be a Genji dashing in from a different angle, that could be a Tracer staging behind and then helping you out with the Sombra, disrupting that hack. All of that stuff is really useful and really important to deny this person hacking you. Now applying the second playstyle, Dueling, this one is going to be specifically designed to counter the Sombra, or how do you deal with that Sombra in this composition here. Now the first one is is again leveraging your mobility such that to take angles, right? So again, we talked about the one around the statue, but maybe you want to slam around here, and if you know the Sombra's here, again, you can 2v1 that Sombra with your Tracer, right? Now, obviously, Sombra's invisible, you're not going to know that, right? So maybe you slam up to here, you walk to here, and the stage, and try and get a soft engage onto the backline from an off angle, and if the Sombra hacks you, again, that Tracer's right there to disrupt that Sombra and take that 2v1. It's so super important that you have some support on your off angles. Again, it doesn't even need to be a Tracer here. It could be a backline support, maybe an Arna's right there as direct LOS to you. Again, could be shielded off by the Sigma, but this could be a Kiriko, it could be a Weaver playing here or playing here, right? There's different examples of that, but the underlying point is that you're forcing a numerical or quantitative overload on the Sombra, such that, again, you're able to take that kind of map control. And obviously, the last playstyle, diving, that one's a bit more intuitive, right? If you've got triggers, as I've spoken about many times throughout this guide, if these guys are in open space, or maybe they're rotating out onto the point itself, they're trying to cap it, they're in open space, they're very easy to dive. Maybe they're already really low because you forced them out with a bunch of soft engages, and they haven't got stuff like, again, HP, Flashbang, Nade, Sleep Dart, those kind of abilities. That stuff is really important for you to actually dive the backline. The really important thing here, especially in team play, now I know if you're gold watching this and you're playing ranked, this won't apply as much, but ult tracking is really important because, again, things like Rally and EMP and Flux can stop you from actually diving. So again, maybe you bait that, right? You pretend to go in, he fluxes you, you Meteor Strike out of the Flux, that kind of stuff. The second to last thing I want to talk about with Doomfist macro-wise is ebb and flow or baiting ultimates. I made an entire video about this, you can check that video out in the top right for more details. And then your Doomfist will go in, and his intention will not be to get a kill. His intention going in, just force anything, force an ultimate. And once that happens, this guy can fuck off and doesn't need to go in. We force Visor, great, 1-0 off the boards. Now all that needs to happen, in fact, you tell me, Andreas, what do you need to do? Live, right? You can make an argument that if you punch away, and then Seismic back on point, and then, you know, power block, they're probably going to rock you and you're not going to live, but hopefully you buy enough time for your Sojourn and for your Genji to get value here. And lastly, before I talk about tank matchups, please do not overextend. Yes, it still happens in top 500 lobbies. I see Doom players feed and then waste their Meteor Strike just to try and get a kill. It's not worth it, bro, trust me. Now onto tank matchups. Doom versus DVa. This one is skill dependent and mostly depends upon how DVa uses her boosters. DVa hasn't got as much aggressive or burst value as you, but she has way more sustain and team utility, being able to peel DPS. The key thing here is being able to pounce on targets and duel targets that are too far away for DVa to help out. On top of that, you want to dive targets after DVa has used her boosters. That is your trigger, and again, links back to that soft hard engage thing. For example, if she flies to her own angle and leaves her backline vulnerable, that is a possible time for you to go. Doom versus Queen. The initial inclination is to say Queen counters Doomfist because you have no armor, which makes her shotgun pretty effective, and she can pull you back in your knife while you're power blocking. Those are valid points, so again, you need to be leveraging your mobility by controlling the space around the Queen. Doom versus Mauga. So I thought I would redo my Mauga section. It's 3 AM at night, but I don't think I went over it in as much depth as I could have. The first thing to go over is actually a pro game. This is probably the most recent game at the highest level between Mauga and the Doom comps. So as talked about a lot throughout the entire guide, Doom will soft engage onto the core of Space Station, as you can see. Chase there, slamming in, getting a bunch of shields, punching straight out afterwards as well. Slam right there you go. Punch Funny Astro into the wall because why not, you've got cover to play around as well. And you'll notice that Chase again slams in right about now. It slams in. If I'm being really nitpicky, he should be playing to the right side and just strafing to the right. Instead he slams out an open space, which forces him to punch away. Not the best soft engage in the world, but the idea is that he's softening up the core of Space Station to get ult charge, to get cooldowns out, that kind of stuff. And he'll hard engage once Space Station decide to use TP or actually go onto the side or rush someone on the side of Ent. So as you can see, they TP to high ground or they TP to the other side of the point here, and this causes Again, Chase to actually go in harder on the side of Landon. He gets him really low. That forces Suzu, that forces Cardiac Overdrive. And unfortunately, Kevster gets traded out here. We don't see Kevster's POV, but Chase has actually done a really good job here. And I think if Kevster actually lives this somehow, some way, Ents have actually, they're in pretty good shape to win this fight, especially with the cooldown trades. And I want to skip over to where Cardi has Cage and how Chase decides to try and outplay this. Chase doesn't actually get caged there at all. And the previous fights were just macro ebb and flow stuff, nothing much more to mention there, specific to Doomfist. And again, you'll see how sort of wide Chase is playing here, away from Hardy. Cardiac Overdrive has been used by Hardy pretty early. Again, Chase threatens that punch on the TP earlier on as well. And afterwards, again, you see Hardy cage here. Unfortunately, again, Kai gets his recoil forced out, not great. But again, look how disciplined Chase is playing. Round around that corner, super hard and super risky for Hardy to try and cage him. And actually, this is just a feed by Master there. Cages him, but he already dies instantly. And Chase nowhere to be found in that cage, right? So again, you're seeing that 15-meter distance that Chase is playing. Very surgical, playing the cover, playing the corners. Actually a pretty good job by him. The other thing I want to go over here is trying to apply this to ranked. Now, dealing with Mauga when Mauga isn't being played with the Lucio Kiriko is a lot easier, actually. Mauga needs a Kiriko for the Suzu, and one of Mauga's biggest weaknesses is rotations, you know? Mauga hasn't got a shield like Sigma to block things like Arnonade, and more importantly, block that for his team. And you'll see Hardy say this here.
Can't really cross, he's too fat.
Right, he's calling Mauga fat, right? But the idea here is that this distance that Mauga has to cross, he and his team, most importantly, not just him, his team as well, they will take so much damage on the rotation from White Room back over to point, right? And Hardy's trying to utilize that distance to force out things like Cardiac Overdrive. And he does that to a T here. So he'll toss 5 strikes, Sim beam there, right, and Cardiac Overdrive will be popped right now, you know? And it's just so hard for that Mauga team to actually rotate to the side of where Hardy's playing. Now, I know Hardy's playing Reinhardt here, not Doomfist, but the same idea still applies. And you'll see it here in this example. I'll actually play the audio clip out. I'll stay silent for this. And this is where I want to slide into the third stage, the exit stage. This is where we forced enough resources from the enemy team, so we stabilize, pull, or exit, and then once that Queen Shout is over, we push back in with Kitsune Rush and a nice Mei Wall. We bait the Jungle Queen into us by playing slow and playing seconds. This idea was actually so that idea there, obviously that applies to Jungle Queen, right? But again, we bait the Jungle Queen onto point, that forces commanding shout, then we re-engage afterwards once that cooldown's gone. And it's the same thing with Cardiac Overdrive effectively. Now, I know Brig isn't great into Mauga, and this comp that we're playing isn't great into Mauga, but Ana Zen, Life Weaver, that kind of stuff, the same macro still applies. So hopefully that goes over how to play Doom into Mauga. It's pretty lengthy, but hopefully pretty detailed, and hopefully concise as well. But yeah, Doom vs Orisa. It seems like she's a hard counter on paper, like many people believe, and that's mainly because of her Javelin. But again, if you're playing the spaces around the Orisa, particularly marking her backline, doing soft dives correctly by slamming in then punching out, then there shouldn't be much to worry about. Get Quick Don made a great video covering the matchup, which I recommend you go and watch. He essentially marked the squishies and Orisa couldn't do much about it. Doom vs Ram. To be honest, you're not going to interact with each other a lot of the time. The only time it's going to happen, at least against a good Ramattra, is when you're punching out with a dive, or when you're low HP and you have no cooldowns. It's really important that you respect Ram's Nemesis form when you are on the back foot. It's not as bad as Mauga, but it's still something worth bringing up. Barring that, keep controlling the angles around the Ram. Doom vs Reinhardt. His 5 strikes basically lead to a fully in-charged and power punch. You're just one singular point of damage off of one. Just try not to get pinned or shattered while you're power blocking. It should be fairly telegraphed, and actually you can bait the shatter and intentionally power block and cancel it to try and make that happen. Macro wise, the same stuff applies as I've said about the ground tanks with Doomfist versus Roadhog. Because of Hog's range and his hook threats, playing against Hog requires nuance, and it depends a lot on your backline. If your backline is Ana Zen, burn the Hog at distance and leverage your Zen to take unfair duels on angles. If your backline is Lucio Kiriko, however, you need to disrupt and whittle down the Hog over time, skirmishing for a trigger that allows you to hard engage. Doom vs Sigma. This matchup is actually fairly similar to Hog, with the main difference being that Sigma is a lot better into Doom on a Zen than Hog is. However, unlike Hog, Sigma struggles at forcing you out or interacting with duels out of his effective range. Abuse the openness on maps like New Queen Street, and abuse high grounds like on King's Row 3rd Point. Doom vs Winston. Okay, so this one I talked a lot about a few months ago when analysing some pro play. To put it in the simplest, easiest terms possible, if Winston jumps on a squishy target on your team, you can punish that Winston by punching him out of bubble. Because of this, what Winston is going to try and do instead is walk onto you and brawl you like a Reinhardt. And he can beat you because he has more sustain. To counteract this, your team needs to take more angles around the Winston and to force the Winston to come into open space when he's trying to brawl you. Here's a visual example on Ilios Lighthouse. Hardy would actually jump the Echo and then try and force the Echo out, which makes logical sense until you realise that Doom can just slam up 2v1 and punch the Winston out of his bubble, and then the Winston feeds and dies. So what Hardy did was just play like a Reinhardt almost, play like a brawl tank. Actually just walk forward and take and hold space because Winston's better at holding space than Doomfist is. So what do we do when that happens? I think really the key thing is we have to play for our angles a lot more. But if you play a really, really deep angle, that puts the Winston in a rock and a hard place situation. Where now, say Gasuch or Hardy or whatever Winston is in the predicament of, oh shit, this Echo's in a really aggro spot, I need to jump the Echo to clear her out, but Hardy knows that if he does that, Andreas is going to clear him out too. So, but then again, right, Hardy he can't really stay here because Echo's in a really tough position. So you put the enemy Winston in a rock and hard place situation. Again, on this map, I wouldn't specifically advise that because it opens space, right, and the angle is pretty open anyways. But on Gardens, right, where on point, you've got lots of little bits of cover, that's something you can absolutely do. Doomfist versus Wrecking Ball. Another skill-dependent matchup. Your advantage here is that you have a bit more burst mobility and burst damage compared to Ball, but you have significantly less individual sustain. Neither of you are also going to interact with each other as well. Just keep in mind that you can slam Ball's mines, and that you want to be controlling those flanks quicker than he does because of your burst mobility. Doom vs Zarya. If Zarya is on high charge and their map is narrow, she definitely has the advantage. But if she's struggling to get charge, and you're playing on a map that doesn't benefit her in any shape or form, like New Queen Street for example, then she's going to be on the short end of the stick. Focus on baiting out bubbles with Slam, then once she's low on bubbles, HP and or energy, that can be your trigger to go in. That's it for the Doomfist guide. This video is like 3,000 words in script and I'm editing this at, what time is it? 5 past 12 in midnight. Yeah, just share the video please. Yeah, bye.